Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you had a great spring break. It's Miss Bogus again, back with our language arts and reading. And I hope that you did something super fun over break. And I'm so excited to be back with you teaching you this week about poetry. And poetry is one of my most favorite types of things to read. And this week we are going to be reading a text called Thunder Underground, and it's by Jane Yolen. And it is actually a book that's just full of poems. And so I'm not going to read you all 21 poems out of this text today. I'm going to read some today, and then Thursday, when we do our nonfiction text, I'm also going to read you some poems out of this book as well. But before we start today, what is poetry? So, poetry is a style of writing where writers play with words. And poetry can really be anything. The main purpose for writing poetry is to make a connection with the reader. Now, we all know about connections. When we read and we make connections in our brain that build with our schema and our background knowledge, and it makes us think of other things. There are really no rules when it comes to poetry because different people write poetry differently. Sometimes when I read a poem, I might think of it differently after I read than someone else that reads it. So it's how it speaks to the reader. And so how I interpret or how I see a poem is probably going to be very different than someone else that reads the poem. Now, before we start today with some of our poems from the text, I want us to look at just some words that we need to know before we get into this. Now, your standard for this week is RL 1.4, which is identify words and phrases in stories or poems that suggest feelings or appeal to the senses. So, how many of you know what your five senses are? Okay, so we have seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touch. So when we read a poem, sometimes all of those senses can be engaged by that poem. You might imagine how something looks in your head when you read it, or how it would sound, or what it would feel like, or maybe even what it would smell like or taste like. So when you read a poem, some of those words really help you imagine what that poet is writing about. And so before we start, I want you to make sure that you know these four words because we're going to be working with these four words today. We're going to be talking about them as we read. And the first one is alliteration. Can you say alliteration? Great. So alliteration is the repeating of beginning sounds. How many of you have ever heard a tongue twister? Yeah. So here's a tongue twister that I learned when I was little. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. How many of you have heard that one? Yeah. That would be an example of alliteration because what sound did we hear repeated? Yep. Look at these two examples. Slippery suds of soap. What sound do you hear repeated? Yeah. Big brown bear bounced. Yep. But so alliteration is just the repetition of sounds, the repeating of sounds. The word repetition is simply just words that are repeated in a text. And we're going to look at an example in our book today of repetition. And then you have the word rhyme, words that have the same ending sounds. Who can think of two words that rhyme? Cat, bat. Yeah, so they both have that ending at sound. So we're going to see a lot of rhyming words today. Poems don't always have to rhyme, but some of the ones that we're reading today do rhyme. And then this last word, emotion. And emotion is just what we feel. And so we're going to be talking about how these poems make us feel, how something makes us feel. And Poems are good at making you feel something because most of the time the people that write the poems, they feel a certain way about something too. So what we're going to do is we are going to read a few poems and talk about them. And I'm going to go back here to my poetry page. And I just want you to listen to some of these poems as we talk through them. The first one is Thunder Underground. Okay, here's the picture for Thunder Underground. Got some ants. Looks like a little ant hill, a little ant farm underneath here. So on this one, I want you to listen specifically for some sound words. Listen to see if you hear any repetition of words or alliteration or any of those things that we talked about. But I really want you to think about how the poem makes you feel. What are you imagining in your head? Thunder underground. That's the sound beetles make when walking round. Squeaky like a creaky door, clicking, clacking, muffled roar. Beetles on the underfloor, scritch, scratch, scrunch. That's the crunch of beetles eating beetle lunch. All roots, no punch. So this poem is about thunder underground being the sound under the earth when there are beetles working below the earth. Now, I heard several things that we talked about. How many of you heard rhyming words in this poem? I did. I heard round and sound, door and roar, lunch and punch. Yep. Now, there was one example, I think, of alliteration in this. I want you to listen and I want you to raise your hand when you hear it. I'm just going to read part of it. Squeaky like a creaky door, clicking, clacking, muffled roar. Beetles on the underfloor, scritch, scratch, scrunch. That's the crunch of beetles eating. Yep, you have your hand raised, don't you? Scritch, scratch, scrunch. Alliteration. What sound do we hear? Sk, sk. Yeah, scritch, scratch, scrunch. So that would be an example of alliteration. So we had several things in that. Now, how does this poem make you feel? This picture, I think, does a good job at how it makes me feel or what it makes me think about. But I can almost hear those beetles under the ground working and scurrying about. And I can see them with the description that this poet gave me. I can visualize them under the ground just working away. And so I think this poet, Jane Yolen, she did a great job at helping us be able to visualize that poem. All right, we're going to read another one called Subway. Now, we don't live in a big city, so we don't have one of these close to us. But we know that a subway, I'm using some background knowledge here, a subway is a train that runs underground. So we're talking about thunder underground. So we've talked about bugs being underground, and now a subway. I like the sound the subway makes deep in its underground den. I like the growling as it goes from street to street, and then I like the squeals its iron wheels make coming round again. I like the flickering lights below that make the nighttime day. I like the rumbling, jumbling cars along the long railway. I only wish that I could ride the subway trains all day. So this is a different kind of thunder sound underground that we're talking about, and that is the subway. Now, I want you to look at this poem and see if you can find any rhyming words. Railway and day, squeals and wheels, den and then. Yep. So we have more rhyming words here. Now, I could really imagine this poem. I could hear the sounds that are underground, the growling sound, and the squeals that the wheels made on the tracks. I could almost see those flickering lights as the poet talked about those. And so that poem also really appeals to our senses. Are you noticing how they really tie in not just sounds and sights, but how things smell and how they sound, what they might feel like? So poets really do play into our senses and what we feel when we read. Okay, and I'm going to read you one more. Magma pools. Now, as I read this one, I want you to listen for an example of repetition. And remember, repetition, that is words that are repeated. So I want you to listen specifically for repetition in this poem. Magma pools. Magma is what comes out of a volcano, right? So we've got magma down here. So here's another example of some thunder underground. Listening for repetition. Magma pools. Hot, hot, hot. In magma pools becoming rock when magma cools. So should we wait an age or two to see what magma pools can do? I haven't got the time. Have you? So that's a really short poem. But did you hear any words that were repeated? Yep, that very first line, hot, hot, hot. Now, those three words, that was an example of repetition because they were repeated. Now, this poem gives me a sense of urgency, like we don't need to be hanging out around this volcano waiting to see what it's going to do. I think that's one reason why this poem was so short, just to get that point across that, hey, it's a volcano. We probably shouldn't hang out and wait to see what this magma can do, to see what that thunder underground might be able to do. So those are just a few of the poems out of this text. And what we're going to do is on Thursday, I'm going to read you a nonfiction text about earthworms. And I'm also going to read you another couple of poems from this book. One's about earthworms. So we're going to kind of share from this book 2 days this week instead of just one. Now, I do want to show you your assignment for today. You're going to have a quiz to do. And after you watch this video, it should be very simple for you to do. And then also you have a video, a fun just little video song about alliteration that I would like for you to listen to before you do your assignment because it may help you. And so after you watch this video, I would like for you to listen to the alliteration song as well. And then after you do that, you are going to do the comprehension check. Now, the first one says, what is an example of alliteration? Also, if you want to do this while I'm reading it aloud, that is perfectly fine. That may help you if you don't know how to read a certain word. So I'm just going to read that to you and the answer choices. And then you can do it during this video, or you may wait and do it when we're finished. So number one is which is an example of alliteration. And your answer choices are the thunder yelled out to the fields, slippery suds of soap, boom, crack, buzz, swoosh, or Bobby has a red cap. It fell off when he ran a lap. So you're going to choose the one that's alliteration. And remember that alliteration is that repetition of beginning sounds that you hear. Number two, you need to write a word that rhymes with twig. And this just tells us that you know your rhyming words. Number three, why would a poet use words that appeal to your senses? So we talked about this. Why would a poet use words that really make us think about our senses. Remember your five senses. So, would a poet do that to help us imagine as if we were there, to make us hungry, or to fill up the page with words easier that way? Number 4, using repetition makes a poem similar to a song because it helps create a rhythm. And I'm going to help you a little bit with this one. But remember, repetition is how words are repeated. And oftentimes when we have songs, songs are like poems. Songs also use repetition to create a certain beat. So I want you to think about that when you answer. And then number 5, look at the short poem below. And it wants you to write some of the words that make you feel something. So I'm going to read this little poem to you, and then your job is going to be to write some of the words that make you feel something and tell me how they make you feel. And then you could draw a little picture here of how the words in this poem make you feel. Here's the poem. Tears drip down, thunder cries out, lightning slashes, the storm wants everyone to know her pain. So I want you to think about that. How does that poem make you feel? Are there any words that make you feel a certain way? And you can write about that here. And feel free to use the back of your page if you need to. And you will send this assignment to your first grade teacher. And so that is all for today. And I hope that you guys have a great Monday. And I will see you back on Wednesday with some more poetry from Thunder Underground and our nonfiction text. Thanks, guys.